Good evening. Tonight we're learning Maseches Yoma Daf Vav. We're going to be starting toward the bottom of Daf Yudalad Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom with the words My Taima. To give a little bit of context in regards to where we are, we learned yesterday about a contradiction. We learned about a stira between our Mishnah. Our Mishnah taught us that the Ketores came first and then the Neiros were prepared later. And then we learned in a brisa yesterday, in a Mishnah actually, halfway down in Yudalad Amud Beis, we learned a Mishnah about the Payas, and we saw there that the Ketores was actually after the Menorah, of Machlokes. And yesterday we gave answer number 1 in the name of Abaye, and Abaye gave the answer that no, don't worry, we're just talking about different parts of the menorah. One was talking about taking care of the five out of the 7 Neiros, and the other was talking about 2 out of the 7. That was answer number 1. And then we learned, and we're still in the middle of that answer, but within that we learned about the sheets of Abba Shaul. And Abba Shaul, 4 lines from the bottom, said, Abba Shaul Omer Meiti v'achar kach maktir, that you prepare the candles, and only afterwards do you bring the Ketores. It says the Gemara, my time of Abba Shaul. Why is it that Abba Shaul says that first we're Meiti, first we prepare all of the candles, and only after do we bring the Ketores? So answers the Gemara, 3 lines from the bottom, Yudalad Amud Beis, Tichsid, because the pasuk writes, Baboker behitivo asaneros v'hadar yaktirena. First, sequentially, the pasuk says that you're meiti asaneros, and then next, the Torah tells us that you are bringing the Ketores. Very simple. His answer is very glad. It's not a complicated answer. So he says it's just based on the psukim. Says Abba Shaul Rabbanan. The rabbis who say that it's not that way, the rabbis in the beginning of a brisa, 5 lines from the bottom, said differently. They said you cannot do the Neiros first and then do the Ketores, but rather they say you do the Ketores first. So what do they do with the pasuk? My Kamar Achmana, says the Gemara, you misunderstood the psukim. The psukim didn't mean to be sequential. Says the Gemara, turning to the top of Tesvav Meral, Bidan Hatava Teimat Mekater Ketores, that at the same time that you're cleaning out the candles is also the time at which the Ketores should be burning. It should be done. They have to be somewhat sequential. You're only one person. You can't do everything at the same time, but they're very, very close together. And we'll see that they're actually split according to some chitas, that you do the 5 Neiros, then you do the Ketores in the middle, and then you do the two Neiros. And that's reflected in the brisa that I showed you yesterday in the Siddur about Abba Shaul. So then says the Gemara, you have to say that this is pshat, that be'idan hatava tehemat mekater Ketores. Why? If you don't say that, then in regard to the Tamid, which was Bein Ha'arbaim, there the pasuk says, it says there that we see that the Ketores is after Neros. There it seems to be in the Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arbaim, that based on the pasuk, it would be that way. That's what it seems like, that the Ketores would be last. Says the Gemara, like we're all thinking like, okay, like who cares about the difference? It says the Gemara, that can't be. 5 lines down on Tesvav and Aleph, the Gemara says, if you want to say it's true that the Ketores goes last, that can't be. Because V'atanya, the brisa writes, and this brisa is going to have 2 approaches. The second one is the one we need to prove our point. But the brisa writes based on the pasuk Me'erev ad Boker, and we learn 2 things from this brisa. Me'erev ad Boker, from night to morning. What is the first thing that we learn? The first thing that we learn is the volume of oil and wick that we need to put into the candelabra, into each of the cups of the menorah. 10 lach midasa. Make sure to give the right amount. Make sure that there's enough oil to last the night. And davar acher, what's the second thing that we learn? Me'erev ad boker ein lecha avoda shekshir me'erev ad boker ela zubel vad. Me'erev ad boker, to teach you that the only thing that can be done overnight is the menorah. And more poignantly, which is not expressed directly in the Gemara, but it's implied, is that the last thing that we do is the menorah. Namely, you cannot have the Ketores after the Neiros. So it says the Gemara, this is what the Rabbanan say back to Abba Shaul. Abba Shaul says the Ketores has to be last, because that's what the psukim say. The Rabbanan say you got the psukim wrong, they have to be done concurrently. And what's the proof? Because the proof is Bein Ha'arbaim, is that by the Korban Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arbaim, there we said it's impossible for the Ketores to be afterwards. So how else would it work out? What then do the psukim mean? Say the Rabbanan, and they would respond, Bidan hadlaka te mekater Ketores hachanami bidan hatava tehei mekater Ketores. So we see here rather clearly from this brisa that supports the sheet of the Rabbanan that the psukim are not meant to be learned in a sequential form. That first and foremost you do the Neiros and then you do the Ketores like Abba Shaul, but rather they're done concurrently. You do the five of the 7 candles, and then you do the Ketores, and then you come back and do the last 2. But haraya, that you're not even allowed to do the Ketores after the Neiros Bein Ha'arbaim. Then the Neiros are the last thing that we do. So says the Gemara, that has to be pshat in our case as well. And then the Gemara says, Abba Shaul, wow, okay, the Rabbanan laid out a very good argument, Abba Shaul. You're not allowed to bring the Torahs after the Neiros Bein Harabayim. So what do you have to go? We're throwing the ball back into your court. Now you have to take a swing. What are you going to do? Amar Lach, Abba Shaul would say, no, you can't learn anything from the Tamid Shel Bein Harabayim. Amar Lach, Shiny Hasam Dechsivo So. There's something unique about Tamid Shel Bein Harabayim, and therefore you cannot learn from it, and therefore your question is not a question. Because all the thrust of the sheet of the Rabbanan was that the Brisa indicates that the Ketores can't be after the Neiros. And he says, you're looking at Psukim, it's apples to oranges. You can't compare the case of Tamid Shel Bein Harabayim to the case of Tamid Shel Shachar. Now, all of this was part of answer one of Abai. Remember the question that we started with today, the question we really learned about last night, which is that our Mishnah says Torahs first and Neiros later. And the Mishnah on the bottom half of Yud Daled Amud Beis says Neiros first and Torahs later, in different order. So that Abai just gave his answer. And now we're going to learn answer number 2, 1/4 of the way down on Tezvav Amud Aleph. Let's learn the sheet of Rav Papa. Rav Papa Amar Lokasha HaRabbanon HaAbba Shol. I know these sheets sound like they're the same. They're not. The previous answer of Abai was distinguishing between whether or not the Torahs came after the cleaning of the 5 cups out of the 7, and then the Torahs, and then the 2. That's how we explain the Gemara according to Abai. Rav Papa says, no, the difference between our Mishnah, which says Torahs first followed by Neiros, and the Mishnah about the pious halfway down on Yudal Amud Beis, where we said that the Neiros are first and then the Torahs. The difference is whether you hold like the Rabbanon Habashal B'mayu Kimta, who's holding like what? Lemas Nisan Dehacha. Our Mishnah, which indicates that first we have the Torahs, followed by the Neiros, that is the sheet of the Rabbanon. And pious, the Mishnah about the pious, which was on the bottom half of Yudal Amud Beis, that's Ka'aba Shol. Says the Gemara, hold on one second. You've given a couple of good answers. But the problem is that we have a new question. We have another brisa that discusses this topic, and we need to try and see how it fits in. Says the Gemara, Ema Seifa. But we have a little bit later in our Masechta, and the side it indicates is Daf Lamed Aleph, so we're halfway to that Daf. So says the Gemara, Heviu lo et hatamid, if they bring on Yom Kippur, if they bring the Korban hatamid to the Kohen Gadol, what does he do? So says the Gemara, Kiratzo, Rashi, what's Kiratzo? Immediately to our right, Dibur Hamasal Kiratzo, Chatcho, the Kohen Gadol makes the Chaticha, Chatcho Chatach Bo Hechsher, he cuts the minimum amount, Shchita, Birov Shnaim, the majority of most of, what does that mean? So we know that there's the windpipe and the esophagus, and the halacha is that mito rice, in order for an animal to become kosher, you have to cut with a perfectly smooth knife through the outer layer of skin and into the at least 51% of both of each, the esophagus, the kana and the veshet, the windpipe and the esophagus, and that is what transfers something into being halachically kosher. But he stops at that point. Kiratzo, back in the Gemara, he does that little bit. Umarak acher shchita al yado, and another Kohen finishes the shchita. And then what does he do while this tamid is being brought? Nichnas lahaktir et haktoras ulahashi ves eloheti ves haneros. Look at the order. So he does the Torah, followed by the Neiros. That's our Mishnah. That's our Mishnah that we started with on the Mishnah that we started with on Daf Yudal Amud Aleph indicates as much, that we said that first and foremost we have to take care of the Torah, and then we have to do the Neiros. So this fits perfectly with the Rabbanan, fits perfectly with our Mishnah in Yudal Amud Aleph. So says the Gemara, Asta'an le Rabbanan. This brisa is explicitly, it's not a, is this a brisa? I think so, not sure. So this brisa or Mishnah that is found on Lamed Aleph that says Nichnas lahaktir saktoros elheti vesaneres, clearly that's a son the Rabbanan. So says the Gemara, a question, it's not a strong question. The Gemara says Reisha v'Seifa Rabbanan umtzias abashol. You have 3 sources. The first and last are the shitas of the Rabbanan that have the Neiros last and the Torahs first. Umetziasa, and the case that's in the middle is the shita of Abashol who puts the Torahs last. Says the Gemara, what's the big deal? Amar lach Rav Papa, absolutely. What we have sheet machlokos like this all over Shas. Why are you being so picky about who? There's a machlokos in the Tanaim. So yeah, some brises are like one and some mishnayos are like the other. Says the Gemara, Reisha v'Sefer Rabbanan umtzias abashol. That's not a problem. So then the Gemara says as follows. Now, just as a chazara, we asked our question stira with our Mishnah Yudal Amud Aleph, which says that the Neiros are last, versus the Mishnah on the bottom of Yudal Amud Beis with the pious that says that the Torah is last. Back in our Gemara, halfway down, Tes Vav Amud Aleph from the word Bishlama. Bishlama Abaye. I understand the answer we learned yesterday. Lo Amar ke Rav Papa. Why didn't Abaye say like Rav Papa? Because there was a natural difficulty with the shita of Rav Papa. What was the natural difficulty of the shita of Rav Papa? As we said, Reisha v'Sefer Rabbanan umtzias abashol lo mokim la. Abaye said, I'm not going to hear from it. I'm not doing that. I'm not going to try and establish the Gemara in a complicated way unless I'm forced to do so. Ela Rav Papa, my time, alo amar ke Abaye. Why didn't Rav Papa say like Abaye? Abaye's answer was more glut. Abaye's answer didn't lead into this problem of three Mishnayos, the first and third are like the Rabban and the middle one's like Abishal. Why didn't Rav Papa, right here, the answer that we learned today, nuance, Tesvav and Aleph, why didn't he say like yesterday's answer of Abaye? Says the Gemara, El Rav Papa, my time will Amar Ki Abaye, Amar Lach, Tana Beresha, Tavas, Shtei Neros, Vahadar, Tavas, Chamesh Neros, because it's out of order. Because if you look at the flow of events that we saw earlier, what we learned was backwards. Now we know as the Seder Hadvarim, and if you look in the Seder, it's reflected this way also, that when they were cleaning out the menorah, they would first do 5 of the cups out of the 7, and then they would do another activity, either the Korban Tamid or the Ktoret, and then they'd come back and do 2. But what did we see earlier? So Rav Papa's like, I can't do what you said, Abaye, because the Mishnayos are out of order. It said first, Hatavas Shtei Neros v'Hadar, Hatavas Chamesh Neros. First it said to do the 2, and then it said to do the 5. That's backwards. So that brisa is very complicated. Abaye, what would you say about that? Abaye is like, why? You're looking at this Mishnah for the wrong purposes. This Mishnah was not meant to be the Seder Hadvar. This Mishnah was just listing an activity in the Beis HaMikdash. Abaye says halfway down, he was just teaching us the general rules, but not about the order. Yes, we do the 2 and we do the 5. Didn't mean to be in a specific order, but Sidra, Hahadar Tanila. Soon down the road, we'll learn what the exact order and flow was. But that which was bothering Abaye was what Rav Papa was brought up, which was this disorder of the Mishnayos of Reisha v'Seifa Rabbanan and the Mitziyasa was Abishol. And what was bothering Rav Papa was the fact that the Mishnayos were not in proper flow. The Mishnayos were not in proper flow because we learned earlier first the 2 of the 7 candles and then the 5 of the 7 candles, and that's out of order. So then Abaye says you got it all wrong. This brings us to a bit of a new sugya. As we saw it briefly quoted, and we're going to spend the rest of today learning about this. We're 2/3 of the way down on Tesvav and Aleph at the word Gufa. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday, we came across a Gemara that spoke about the sprinkling of blood that was done on the corners of the Mizbeach. Just for some terminology for today, we have a phrase called Achas Teushtayim, one Zrika, but it touches 2 sides of the Mizbeach. So that's Achas Teushtayim. It's 1 throw of blood, but it touches 2 sides. You do it at the corner. So let's say, for example, your Mizbeach is mamish like this, and you throw blood here. So it's going to hit both sides of the walls. Let's say the north wall and then the east wall. Great. So that's Achas Teushtayim. And Shtayim, Shein Arba, is you can do 2 throws at the opposite ends of the box of the Mizbeach. On one end, you get north and east, and on the other side, you get west and south. Just with 1 on each side. That's Shnayim Shein Arba. So that's just as an opening frame that will help us understand what's going on here. Gufa, 2/3 of the way down. When the Kohen gets to the corner of the northeast, Nosem Mizrachis Tfonis, with 1 throw, Achas Shushtaim, with 1 throw, he can hit 2 walls, the northern wall and the eastern wall. And then he goes around to the opposite corner. Caddy corner, he walks all the way around, he covers 2 sides of length of the Mizbech, he wraps around Ma'arav Istromis, and on the southwest side, Nosen Ma'arav Istromis. However, the Tani Allah Reb Shimon Ish HaMitzvah, the name we saw yesterday, Reb Shimon Ish HaMitzvah argues with this and says, no, Mishane v'Tamid, it's not true, you got it wrong. When it comes to the Korban Tamid, things are different. And let's see how we said by this, the initial Shita in the Tanaim that we just saw says that it's Shtayim Shem Arba. You stand at 1 corner and you hit 2 walls, go to the other opposite corner, you hit 2 more walls. We start on 1 corner and you hit the north and the east, go to the other corner, you hit the south and the west. Says Reb Shimon Ish HaMitzvah that that's not correct. We're about 8 lines before the widest lines. Bala Lekaren Mizrachis Tzfonis, I agree. He says, I agree to the Tanakama Nosim Mizrachis Tzfonis. I agree that at the corner where the north wall of the Mizbech and the east wall meet, that it's 1 sprinkle. However, and here's where he deviates strongly. That was Achas Shushtaim. Here, he's going to break that rule. But Ma'arav Istromis, when he goes to the southwest wall, things change. No saying Ma'arava, he specifically puts it on the west wall, and then Ve'acharkach, no saying Droma. So that's different. So he's touching, instead of doing Achas Shushtaim, 1 sprinkle that hits both the west and the southern walls. No, he literally with his hands touches the western wall with blood and then goes to the other wall and touches the wall. So on one side, he did Achas Shushnaim, 1 sprinkle that got the northeast side of the wall. And on the other side, he touched the southern and western walls separately. My time under Reb Shimon Ish HaMitzvah. Why does he do this? Why on one side does he do Achas Shushtaim? And why on the other side does he do Shtayim Shushtaim? He has to do separate acts. Why does he do that? Says the Gemara, 5 lines before the white lines, Omer Rav Yochanan, Mishumcha debei Rav Yanai, one of the Bnei Shiva and the base medrash of Rav Yanai, Omar Kratz, based on the pasuk. So we see that it's the korban tamid, but it has the word chatat in it. Olahi, it is in fact an olah. So here, what the Gemara is teaching us is, yes, it's an olah. It says olas tamid. However, the pasuk has the word chatas in it. We've never thought about this. We have a very simplistic view of the psukim. But the pasuk says, taka, it's an olah, but it makes reference to the fact that it's a chatas. So what? So it says the Gemara like this. When we have an olah, we use the rule of achas shushtaim. But when we have a chatas, we don't do achas shushtaim. You have to touch each side of the wall. So because the pasuk says olah, so then you can sprinkle one, that's the northeast corner. But on the southwest corner, there you can't sprinkle achas shushtaim because we're trying to capture an element of the chatas, because the pasuk speaks about a chatas, and therefore instead of sprinkling achas shushtaim, you touch the western wall and you touch the southern wall. So it says the Gemara, 2 lines before the white line. So Ketzad, what are the details of this? And as I just kind of foreshadowed this is exactly what the Gemara says. No saying achas shushtaim kemaisa ola. At one corner, at the northeast corner, he does like the maisa ola. By olas, we sprinkle at one corner to hit 2 sides. However, shtaim shein shtaim, but kemaisa chatas. But when it comes to the southwest corner, there we don't do the sprinkling like an ola. We do the sprinkling like a chatas, and the sprinkling like a chatas is not one act that captures 2 walls, but you have to touch each of the walls. So you do get all 4 walls. You're blending the worlds of an ola and a chatas. An ola is achas shushtaim, 1 wall, 1 sprinkle, 2 walls, and the chatas is touching each of those walls. It says the Gemara, first of the long lines, v'litein shtaim shein arba k'maisa ola, ve'arba shein arba k'maisa chatas. Okay, all right. So if the pasuk talks about an ola and the pasuk talks about a chatas, you should do the full sprinkling of both. You should do achas shushtaim at each opposite corner, at the northeast corner, at the southwest corner. Check all your boxes for ola, and then you should go back around for the chatas component of the pasuk and touch each wall with the blood. East, west, north, south. Get it done. Why not? Not east, west, north, south in that order. You'd be going around, walking around. But still, why would you not do that? Make it all be yotzei both. Says the Gemara. Lo matzinu damim shemechaprim v'chozer mechaper. You can't do 2 full sets with 1 korban. It doesn't make sense like that. So you're not going to do achas shushtaim, shtaim shem arba, as we would say. You're not going to do shtaim shem arba for the ola, and then arba shein arba for the chatas. That's too much. We don't have such a precedent for that. Says the Gemara, wait, what? You're talking about precedent? V'chi matzinu damim shechetzian chatas v'chetzian ola. You're telling me that there's no precedent to do a double set of zrikos, 1 for the world of ola, all 4 sides of the mizbeach, and 1 for the world of chatas, all 4 sides. There's no precedent for this either. There's no precedent for half ola, half chatas. So you forget that. It must be because the Torah specifically showed us that the world of olas tamid includes chatas. So if there's no precedent for your case of half sprinkling ola, half sprinkling chatas, then make it all sprinkling ola and all sprinkling chatas. Why do you get to be right? There's no precedent for either of the shitas. It's such an important idea in halacha to make sure that we understand that precedent is huge. We have this in secular law, lahavdil, but when there's precedent, I think they call it a priori. I think that's what it's called. But when there's precedent, we have a case of precedent. You can look back in the past. In the past, the Supreme Court ruled 1, 2, and 3. Therefore, we can rely on that. But when there's no precedent, why do you get to be right? So the Gemara has to answer that question. We're lacking precedence here. So says the Gemara, no. What does that mean, that there's pisuk matanos? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi, 8-9 lines from the bottom of the page. Dibur hamaschel pisuk matanos be'almahu, says the Gemara, ho'lushtein be'keren achas, ein kan ho'chachas ma'asachatas. Says the Gemara, you got a practical problem. We can't distinguish what happened. We won't know. At least on one corner where we sprinkle achashim shnayim, I can tell from the splatter, I know what's going on. And on the other side, I can tell when you touch the corner, I can tell they look very different. But if what you're saying is that I do shtaim shein arba, opposite corner sprinkle, and then go around in the same spot, touch with your hand blood, then I don't know what type of korban you just did. I'm all kind of confused. That's what the Gemara says. You're right that I have no precedent, but I do have a very good svara to say that we shouldn't do full sets of zrikos for ola and for chatas, and rather to split them into 2. Says the Gemara, "V'nesiv achash yishtayim lamata k'maisa ola shtayim shein shtayim lamala k'maisa chatas." Well, there's one other distinction between ola and chatas. The ola, when we do the sprinkling, is always on the bottom half of the mizbech. We know that the mizbech was cut in half around the side by the sikra. There was a little line there that separated the top and the bottom. So says the Gemara, why aren't you distinguishing between the ola, which is below the sikra, and the chatas, which is above the sikra? So that's what the Gemara is recommending here. When we do the sprinkling that's representative of the ola, lemata, it should be below the line of the sikra, kamaisa ola. And the shtaim shein shtayim, when you do the one on each wall for the chatas, lemaila kamaisa chatas. Great question. There's more than just one difference between an ola and a chatas. Difference number one is how many zrikos we do. And difference number two is where on the mizbeach, height-wise, do we do this? The ola is below the sikra, lower down, and the chatas is above. Why don't we make that distinction? Says the Gemara. Another, lo matzinu. We have no precedence for this. Lo matzinu, damim shechetzion lamala v'chetzion lamata. We don't have a case like that in Shas as a precedence where the sprinkling for one korban, part of it is below the sikra and part of it is above the sikra. Says the Gemara, really below? We don't. I can show you a case. 3 lines from the bottom, 4 lines from the bottom. Tasvav Meralav. V'atnan. The Mishnah writes, language from Yom Kippur that we're familiar with, right? That he was sprinkling, and what does it say? He did, lost my place. Achas lamala, 1 up, 7 down. What does that show you? That shows you that we do have precedence where a sprinkling can be done above the sikra and below the sikra. You said we have no precedence. Yes, we do. Answers the Gemara, no. Incorrect. Kimatzlif. Nobody knows what the word kimatzlif means. Some of the Meforshim write, Eini Yodea Lashono, that type of language, this word is not a normal word. So it says the Gemara, thankfully, my kimatzlif. What does it mean, kimatzlif? So there it says the Gemara, Machvi Rav Yehuda kimingadna. It's like giving malkos. What is this talking about? That when you give malkos, when the Bezdin would give malkos, they'd give a lash, and then they would always move down on the person's back. They wouldn't hit the same spot twice, but they tried not to hit the same spot twice. They'd go lower and lower and lower. Rashi has this language also, 3 lines from the bottom. Dibra Matkil, Kiminagdana says, Rashi, Kishleach Bezdin, Hamake Berutzua, Zola Matimizo, She'eno Make B'makom Echad. Rashi says, I've never heard of the word before, but when we do Malkos, Rashi says, you're doing one lower than the other. So what does it mean, Kimatzlif in our Gemara? You thought there was precedence, that maybe it's taka true that we had a case where there was sprinkling above and below the sikra. Says the Gemara, absolutely not. All it meant is that his first sprinkle, as high as it was still below the sikra, and every next one of the 7 were lower than that. That's all that it means. So there is no precedence below, says the Gemara. But wait, maybe I have another case of precedence where we did a sprinkling that was above and below. Says the Gemara, Ve'atnan, 3 lines from the bottom. Ve'atnan, Hiza mimenu al taharo shel mizbeach shava pe'amim, 7 times. It seems that there was a sprinkling 7 times. And from the word tiharo, what do we learn? My lava palge de mizbeach. Doesn't that refer to the very center line of the mizbeach, the sikra itself? And therefore, some blood must go above and some blood must go below. How do we know that the word tihara that's used here is a reference to the middle? So it says the Gemara, Kedamri Inchi, Taher Tiharahu Palga de Yoma. When we talk in this language of Tahar Tihara, it's a reference to the middle of the day. So therefore, when the Mishnah, 3 lines from the bottom of the page says, he's amimenu al tiharo, it's talking about the middle of the mizbeach. Therefore, some must go above and some must go below. Says the Gemara, no again. Amar Rava Bar Shila, lo, you're incorrect. Where was that sprinkling done referred to there? It wasn't in the middle of the mizbeach. Agufe de mizbeach. What does that mean? The body of the mizbeach. Rashi. Al gaga, on the top of the mizbeach, mamish, not on the wall, like on the flat part on the top. So this Mishnah was not talking about above and below the chutz hasikra. So again, no precedence for a case where we do above and below. Says the Gemara, dichsiv uche'etzem hashamayim letaher, and Rashi here explains how all of this is explained, but it means that it's on the top of the mizbeach. After the Gemara, 2 lines down, Tesvav Medbeis, my shnad yahiv ola bereisha, the hadar yahiv chatas. Why do we do the sprinkling that's representative of the ola first and do the chatas second, right? If the korban and the pasuk olas tamid, but has the word chatas in it, why do we choose to do one instead of the other? Maybe nesi bereisha de chatas v'hadar nesi de ola. Maybe we should reverse the sprinklings. The first one we should do on the southwest wall, which is biyadayim. You have to touch each wall, shnaim shehem shnaim. You don't do one, which is two. You do two, which is two, touching each side. And then I go around the other side, and you can do your ola splattering, which is achash yishnaim. So says the Gemara, kevan de ola, since be'etzem, the korban tamid really is an ola, he kadma beresha. That's why it becomes, yes, there's a chatas component, but primarily the korban tamid is an ola. And therefore, afal pi that is true, there's a component of a chatas. So what? The primary korban is an ola. So that zrika comes first. Asks the Gemara 5 lines down. We'll be stopping 2/3 from the bottom of the page. A little bit more to go for tonight. Says the Gemara, why do we start northeast and go to southwest? Says the Gemara, let's reverse it. Maybe we should go the other direction where we start southwest and then move to northeast. Sorry, is that right? Let's start on the southeast corner. He mixes them up. And then we should do the northwest corner. Says we can't. Amre Ola to Una Yesod. The Keren Dromis Mizrachis Lo Haya Le Yesod. The Yesod was a 1 amma al 1 amma. It was again, let's call it approximately 1.5 by 1.5 base that was only on certain sides of the Mizbeach. But the Korban Ola, when we do the Zrika, requires a part of the Mizbeach that has that base. And if you don't have the Yesod, it doesn't count. So therefore, we couldn't do that. So we started on the northeast corner as described above. Ask the Gemara another question. Why do we start at that specific location? Maybe we can start somewhere else. Maybe Nesi Beresha Ma'aravis Dromis, where there is still some Yesod, says the Gemara for a totally different reason. The reason why we had to start where we started and not somewhere else is Kevan de Amar Mar Kolpino Chatapona Lo Yehu Ela Derech Yamin LeMizrach. We have this rule in the Mizbeach, you're always supposed to turn right. So I just went somewhere, hit up some batting cages. When I was walking in, they had arrows everywhere where you could walk because of COVID. You can't turn there. You had to follow the arrows the whole way through. In the Mizbeach, I don't think they had arrows on the floor, but everybody knew that halacha. You're always supposed to turn right. So you'd walk in a way where you can ensure that you're going to turn right. So if that's true, Beresha, Upaga, what was the first corner you got to from the place you were standing when you were about to do the Zrika, the northeast corner? So that's why you started there. It had to be a place that had a Yesod. It had to be a place where it was turning right to the east. Yeah, you're done. So you hit the northeast corner. How do you know that it is the Ola in which there is a Ma'aseh Chatas? Maybe we should consider this korban to be a korban chatas. Says the Gemara, lo sal kadaitach. No one would have ever thought that. And with this, we're going to close. Why? Because what we're doing is we're taking a component of chatas and we're throwing it in with the olas tamid. Sikum hadvarim of the last many lines. I know there's a bit of nuance with all the directions. The short version of the story is that according to Rav Shimon Isha Mitzvah, he was of the opinion that you would, for a korban tamid, sprinkle on the northeast corner, achat shushtaim, one sprinkle that would hit the north and east walls of the mizbeach, and on the other side, he would not do a sprinkle in that way, but he would rather touch the south and west walls, the kohen, in order to fulfill the component of the olas tamid, which was a chatas, and by chatas we don't do that. And with this, we will close Amir Tashem. Tomorrow night, we're going to learn a little extra. Tomorrow, Tuesday?
Yes.
Not tomorrow night. Tomorrow's regular blot. The next night, we're going to learn a little extra. We'll have a very short shiur on the night of Daf Yomi, probably an amud, a shorter amud, and then we'll be able to celebrate properly with the Hilula of Rashbi. Wishing you all a beautiful night.